So, fun fact, in normal years, during the month of July, I basically shut down every single thing that I have going on in the morning of every single day to watch the Tour de France. I love the Tour de France. Now, I didn't always like cycling. I really got into it because of my husband. My husband used to be really into cycling. He's a very good cyclist. He's been cycling all his life. And on our first date together, he made me watch the Tour de France. And I said, this is stupid. And he made me watch it anyway. And then I realized that there are like epic crashes and it's very dramatic. And I got very into it. And I bring that up because I've actually been thinking a lot about something cycling related in relation to what is going on with the 2020 election. So you probably recognize this dude right here, Lance Armstrong. I have this article pulled up because it was before Lance Armstrong confessed to cheating in the Tour de France. He sent out this snarky tweet, basically kind of being a little bit of a dick of himself laying under his 7 yellow jerseys. We can even see a much better image of it there. And he was doing this in defiance of the people investigating him. Now, we of course all know that Lance Armstrong has come out now and has said, yeah, he cheated. He admitted to it. He got his Tour de France titles taken away. But here's what a lot of people don't understand about this situation is that Lance Armstrong was not the only person cheating in the Tour de France. He was simply the best cheater in the Tour de France because everyone else that was remotely in contention to win this race was cheating right alongside him. They were all cheating. Lance was just the very, very best cheater that there was, and that's why he won 7 jerseys. And by the way, it's also because he is actually really talented and gifted. But when you put a group, the amount of people that are capable of winning the Tour de France is an exceptionally small group. Even among like the 150 plus some odd riders that enter the Tour de France, there is a very, 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 very small percentage of maybe on a good day, a dozen people who are even going to be remotely in contention to win that race for a variety of reasons. So even with Lance Armstrong cheating, he still had to be exceptionally, exceptionally good to beat the rest of the cyclists. And you basically, when you get into a situation where everyone is cheating, and it's kind of like this open secret that everyone's cheating, well, it's not about talent at that point. It's not about training. It's about what shortcuts can you take to be the very best cheater of the group of cheaters. And I've been thinking about that a lot in regards to the election, because the Supreme Court has shown us now that they are really, really, really disinclined to get involved in this election, which frankly to me is a little bit ridiculous because that, like, you've got one job, Supreme Court. What are you doing? Let's look at this article from Red State. We're just going to skip down a little bit. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll link it, of course, in the description below if you want to go and check it out. But here we go. In the 2020 election, there were numerous orders from state and county officials that were alleged attempts to allow for people to vote by mail to stop the spread of COVID-19. These attempts included universal mail-in vote orders within certain states and changes to ballots, certain rules, which extended the time which voters had to return their ballots. In Pennsylvania, for instance, a law passed by the Commonwealth was struck down by the courts. Instead of sending them back to the drawing board to alter the law to meet the bounds set by activist judges of the courts themselves changed the law, contrary to the constitutional process. The attorney generals and secretary of states across the country refused to enforce certain laws even under orders from the Supreme Court of the United States. These actions created a discrepancy between states that followed the rules and laws to conduct their elections and the states that changed the rules and laws outside of the constitutional process to create for themselves an unfair advantage. Exclusively, the states and counties that changed the rules outside of the Constitution were blue. I know that's shocking to so many of you. In Arizona, blue counties extended deadlines and changed counting rules to favor the blue voters. In Georgia, counties changed counting rules, conducting the count absent the watchers who were allowed by law to oversee the process. In Wisconsin, Dane County election officials presided over the largest return of mail-in ballots in the state's history, largely because the rules changes instituted by county election officials. Most egregiously, Pennsylvania elections officials and the Attorney General ignored orders from 2 courts, including the United States Supreme Court, to count ballots from unconstitutional changes to the elections process initiated by executive order and judicial advocacy. When Texas's Ken Paxton filed his suit with the United States Supreme Court, he did so with all of the above issues in mind. He saw how legitimately unfair it was that Texas and all other states could conduct elections within rules instituted by their various legislators within the bounds of constitutional guidelines, yet other states could simply change their rules to be able to send out ballots, collect them, and count them from voters who would likely either have never been engaged or, worse, were cast through illegitimate means. The Supreme Court didn't even hear the case. It's like they heard the arguments, it isn't like they heard the arguments or allowed for the public to be part of the understanding of the complexity of the Paxton suit. Instead, they refused to hear it because states are allowed to set up and follow their own election rules, even when those rules are unconstitutional or ignore the constitutional process. The dissenters, Alito and Thomas, both felt there were merits to the case that warranted the case being heard. The 7 other justices, including the 3 Trump appointees, all voted against hearing the case. The decision should have been 9-0 in favor of hearing the case, and later 9-0 in favor of striking down all edicts, orders, and rules that were changed outside of the constitutional process and invalidating the ballots cast under such rules. Well, this certainly would have eliminated ballots cast through legitimate means by voters who were truly interested in the process. The elimination would not have been the fault of anyone other than the people who changed the rules outside the constitutional bounds set forth by the U.S. Constitution and the constitutions and charters in various states. It is inherently unfair to those states that could follow the process. It is a denial of the rights of law-abiding citizens, counties, and voters in the interest of potentially denying the rights of, at best, a well-meaning, unconstitutional, and unlawful voter. It's said to the states and counties, go nuts! Do whatever you want with your election laws, and as long as someone doesn't challenge it from within your state, you're golden. In other words, if a state or activist judges decide to ignore the constitutional process for whatever reason they deem necessary, those changes cannot be challenged by any states for any reason whatsoever. And this is the precedent that the Supreme Court has left us with in not hearing this case. And now we know a little bit more about why they may have made this decision. Kyle Becker sent out a tweet. You guys know I'm kind of taking a break from Twitter, but there are certain people on Twitter that I still pay attention to in terms of getting news from. And if you're not following Kyle Becker, you absolutely should. He's at Kyle, KYLENABECKER, but you should definitely follow him. He's really tweeting out a lot of the information about what's going on with the investigations. And he tweeted out this just a couple hours ago. This is from SCOTUS, and this is a video that was on C-SPAN. This person said a staffer heard screaming through the walls as Justice Roberts and other liberal justices were insisting this case not be taken up. And what they heard screamed through the walls when the Supreme Court justices were gathered among just the Supreme Court justices, no phones, no computers, no anything, just among them to decide whether or not to take up this Texas case. A staffer heard heard John Roberts specifically screaming through the wall, "I don't give a bleep about Bush v. Gore. At that time, we didn't have riots." They made the purposeful decision not to take up this case, not because they shouldn't have, but because of the context in which it was brought. And in doing so, they set a really dangerous precedent. And here's what I'm thinking about if we want to go back to Lance Armstrong being an epic douche in this tweet that he sent out, but that in the context in which Lance Armstrong won all of these 7 jerseys, all of these 7 yellow jerseys, was the context that he was the best cheater among a group full of cheaters. So has the Supreme Court essentially abdicating their responsibility to be the final adjudicators in this process, have they basically set the stage for an arms race of sorts to take place between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party about who can become the best cheaters? Because if there is zero disincentive to cheat in elections, if there is zero disincentive to commit election fraud, and YouTube, let's just be very clear, I'm not saying what the result of that election fraud was per your guidelines about which videos you're going to censor. But if there is no disincentive for anyone to commit election fraud because the Supreme Court ain't going to hear it anyway, then why would the Republicans or the Democrats just back away and say, you know what, guys, we're going to do the right thing. We know the other party is probably cheating, but we're not going to stoop to their level. No, what this is going to do is it's going to create an arms race. It's going to create an arms race. Now, I've talked a lot about how I don't really believe the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are really all that different. I think they're two sides of the same coin. I think they're both establishment. Trump effectively created a third party that was a populist movement in between the two of them that attracted disaffected people on both sides who just wanted stuff to get done, just wanted stuff to get changed. But what has happened since the election, what the Republican establishment has shown us since the election, is that they don't care about that. They don't care about the people. They're running right back to where they were before Trump because they hated Trump to begin with. So now we've got the Democrats who, I think there's a good fair bet they pulled shenanigans. We have the Republicans on this side thinking, if we don't pull shenanigans, we are never going to win an election again. And we got the Supreme Court saying, we're not going to get involved, guys. Like, do whatever you want. What disincentive is there for the Republicans to not start cheating? And if they do that, what disincentive is there for the Democrats to not say, okay, we're going to get even better at cheating than you? And then the Republicans go back, oh yeah, Democrats, hold our beer. We're going to get even better at cheating than you. The Supreme Court, in rejecting the Texas case, did more than just allow this election to go without some arbiter in the middle. They set the stage for an arms race of election fraud in this country because they've shown that they're unwilling to step in and do the right thing. And that's probably the most terrifying thing of all. I know, happy topics here today on my channel. Well, guys, that's my thoughts for the moment. Listen, if you enjoyed this video, I do daily content around news, politics, culture, really whatever I feel like talking about. If you want to follow along and help me overcome YouTube shenanigans that they pull with channels like mine all over the place, hit that little red subscribe button down below. Maybe give it a thumbs up so YouTube actually recommends my content to you in the future. Again, I do post every single day, at least one video, sometimes 2 or 3, depending on how much stuff I feel like talking about. So even if it doesn't show up in your subscription or in your notifications, just check right back because there's probably something new. All right, guys, that's all I've got for right now. I'll see you soon.